Welcome to Pomodoro Joe for Monday, July 3rd, 2023. Today we're doing LeetCode problem 859, buddy strings. This is an easy problem. Given two strings, S and goal, return true if you can swap two letters in S so that the result is equal to goal. Otherwise return false. Swapping letters is defined as taking two indices, I and J, zero indexed, such that I doesn't equal J. All right, so they have to be different letters or different indices. And swapping the characters at S index I and S index J. For example, swapping indices 0 and 2 in A, B, C, D is equal to C, B, A, D. So we swapped 0 and 2. All right. And then we have some examples. So we have AB and BA. Well, you just swap both of those letters and you should have the result. So that's true. All right. Next one, AB and AB. You can't swap these letters because if you swap these letters, you'll get BA. So this returns false. So we actually have to perform one swap. If we don't perform the swap and they're the same characters or the same strings, this doesn't count. All right, and the last one, AA, and the goal is AA. Interesting, this is true because we can actually swap the first A for the second A. That's interesting. All right, then we have some constraints down here. Okay, so this one, let's not do this in C++. Let's try Python 3, actually. All right, we'll put 25 minutes on the Pomodoro timer and get started. So this one is actually on the harder side of an easy problem. There's a lot going on with this one. Now, if you're new to programming, there's going to be a lot of stuff to learn here. So I'll try to go slow. I'll try to explain what I do. It's going to be a little bit complicated, though. All right, so for this one, what are some of the skills that we'll need or some of the tools that we'll need to solve this problem? The first one is we'll need to be able to go through each string one character at a time. Okay, so we can use indexing in Python to do that. Other languages might not be able to do that, but in Python we can index into our string. So we'll look at our characters one at a time. If we find a character that doesn't match, we want to keep track of that index, like where did we find a mismatched character? So we'll keep track of where we find characters that don't match between our input string S and our input string goal. Now there are a couple situations here. We could find one mismatch, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The only type of mismatch that will possibly give us a true value at the end will be if there are two mismatched letters. Then we can possibly swap those two mismatched letters to get the right answer. Now, if there's only one mismatched, then that means we have to return false. There's no way to swap just one mismatch to create a matched pair of strings. If we get more than two mismatched, we also have to return false because we are only allowed to swap two characters. Now, if we get zero mismatched, now these are the same strings, that means S and goal are the same. Well, then it's a little bit more complicated because as we saw down here, in this case, we have to return false because we can't swap characters. Even though they're the same string, there's no way to swap two characters in S to get goal. But in this one, they are the same string, but you can swap characters to get goal. And the key with this one is that the characters are duplicated. So we also have to keep track of whether or not we have duplicate characters in our input string. So if we have zero mismatches, if we have a duplicate, then we can do that swap and return true. So this is a lot of things to keep track of. So I'll break this down. The first thing I'll do is actually an early out. This is our simple test. We'll check the length of string S and the length of string goal. If these are not the same length, there are more characters in one or the other, then we have to return false. There's no way to convert one string into the other if they aren't the same length. So let's just keep track of these here. I'm going to create some helper variables, length of S, and that's just length of string S. And we'll also have length of, I'll call it G, but that's length of goal. And then we can do our check. If length of S does not equal length of G, then we can return false. So that one's pretty straightforward. Now in other languages, they might not have length as one of their options. It might be goal.count or goal.size. You'll have to look at your specific language to figure out how to find the length of a string. All right, so what's next? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I'll try to do this the simplest way that I can think of. We'll need to go through every character in string S and compare it to every character in goal. Now, when we find a mismatched character, we want to record where did we find that mismatch? What index were we at when we found that mismatch? So I'll actually have two variables, one that's mismatched index 1 and the other that's mismatched index 2. And I'll set them to none, so we don't have any mismatched index to start with. Now, in Python, I can use none. In other languages, you might need other values like nil or null or -1, something like that. Pro tip, do not use 0 for the default value here, because 0 is actually a valid index. So we want to make sure that we have no index here. There's nothing that we know of that's a mismatched index at this point. All right, the other thing that we'll need to keep track of is whether or not we have a duplicate character. So I'll have has duplicate. And we'll initialize this to false because initially we don't know if it has a duplicate, but we'll assume that it doesn't until we can find out otherwise. Now, to keep track of whether or not we have a duplicate, we kind of have to know what characters are in our string. So for this, and this is where it gets a little bit more complicated than I would say an easy problem generally has, I'm going to use something called a set. So this is my letters set. And what a set is, so a set is like, you can consider it a bag that holds a bunch of items, but it only holds unique items. So I could throw letters into this set. So I'll put A and B and C. If I put another A in, it only records that there was one A. It doesn't even keep track of a count. It just records there is an A in this set. So I could put 10 A's in this set and it would still just have one A in the set. So our letter set will keep track of what letters we've seen. So as we go through our characters one at a time in our string, we'll throw our letters into this set. Then we can also check when we come across a new letter. Is this letter already in the set? If it's already in the set, that means we've seen that letter before in our string. So this letter that we're about to throw into the set is a duplicate. And then we can flip our has duplicate to true. So that's a little bit more complicated than I'd say most easy problems have. All right, now we also need to talk about loops. So for this one, I need to go through every character in our string. So to do that, I will use a for loop. And so for this, I'll have for, and I'll call the index, for every index in range, the length of s. So this is the Python syntax. Other languages will have different syntax. You might have for I equals 0 in, or while I is less than some length s, I plus plus. Except I'm not going to confuse you too much, but other languages will have different formats for their for loops. For Python though, I can have for every index in the range of length s. And what range will do is it will go from 0 up to length s. It won't include length s, but it will go up to length s, which is exactly what we want for this particular problem. So this will start at 0 and go from 0, 1, 2, 3, and index will hold that value. So index initially will be 0, and then it will be 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, all the way up till we reach length of s, and then it will stop. Okay, so let's pull out every letter. I'll be writing a little bit more code than normal just to demonstrate what we could do or how this works. So you don't actually need to pull out separate variables for some of these things, but I'll make these separate variables here just to keep things clear. So I'll have the letter at, okay, so the letter in our string s, that'll just be s at this index. And this is the subscript syntax or indexing syntax. I use s with square brackets and I pass in my index. So that will be the letter at this index in my string s. Now I also want my letter for the goal here. So letter G, that's goal at this index. So now we want to compare our two letters. If letter S is equal to letter G, well, then we can just move on. So I can say continue here. Now what continue will do is it will basically just short circuit and we'll jump from this point right back up to the top of this for loop. So we'll come back in here with the next index. So this will be useful later on. I'm not actually going to use it here. I'm just pointing out that's what it does. But you would say if these letters are the same, we can just continue. We'll just move on to the next letter. Okay. Now I don't really want to do that because we do need to keep track of all of our letters in our set here. So the first thing I really want to do is check to see if this letter is already in our set. So if our letter S is in our letters, that means we've already seen this letter sometime before in our string. In that case, this is a duplicate, so we can set has duplicate equal to true. All right, next we do want to put our letter into this set. So letters.add, that's the function to add something to our set. Letters.add this letter S. So we're going to put our letter into our set. Now we definitely have to do this check before we put the letter in, because we want to make sure that this letter hasn't been in the set before if we're going to make sure that it's a duplicate. All right, so this takes care of our duplicate. We're checking to see if the letter's already in our letters set. If it is, then this is a duplicate and we can set that to true. If it's not, we just move on. Either way, we move on. All right. Then we'll add our letter to this letter set. Next, we'll check if the letters are not equal. So if this letter for our string doesn't equal the same letter in this position for our goal, well, then this is a mismatch. So let's keep track of that. So first, let's see if we already have some mismatch. So if mismatched index 1, I'm just going to copy this. So if this is none, so we haven't actually recorded any mismatched letters so far, well then this will be our first mismatch. So we can just set this match letter index 1 is equal to this index. And this is where we'll continue. So at this point we jump out of this if statement and we go back up to the top of our for loop. All right, so we found a mismatched letter. We're going to record that in our mismatched index 1 and then we'll just continue. All right, if the mismatched index 1 is not none, we've already found at least one mismatched index. Let's check to see if mismatched index 2 is none. So if we've already found one, let's see if we've found 2. All right, if mismatched index 2 is equal to none. So if this one's not equal to none, we've found one mismatch, but now we're checking, did we find a second one already? If we haven't, this one's none, then we'll set our mismatch index 2 equal to this index. If we make it past both of these, we have a mismatched letter, but we've already recorded both 1 and 2 mismatches. This will be our third mismatch. At this point, we can return false. This is an early out. It should make things a little bit faster, but it can also make things a little bit more confusing. So you don't have to do it this way. But at this point, we've recorded 2 mismatched letters already. This is a third mismatched letter. That means that swapping 2 letters for our S won't give us our goal, so we can return false. All right, now we've made it all the way through all the letters. We've only run across up to 2 mismatches. We can have 1, we can have 2, we can have none. We don't really know. Well, we can check. That's what we'll have to do here. So now we have to check, how many mismatches do we have? So if both are mismatched indexes, let's see. No, that's not what I want. So first let's just check. If this one is none, and so if we have no mismatches, mismatched index 1 is none, and mismatched index 2 is none, we have no mismatched letters. So that means our S and our goal were the same string. Now the only way we can swap letters in the same string to get the same string is if we have duplicates. So at this point we can return has duplicates. So if we have a duplicate, we're able to swap the duplicate letters and that gives us our same string, so we can return true. If we don't have a duplicate, then we can't swap any letters to get the same string back, so we return false, and that's just has duplicate. Okay, so we've handled that case. Now we have to handle the other cases. If we had only one mismatch, let's check that. If mismatch index is none, or is not none, So here's another one of our cases. If we have one mismatched index, so our mismatched index 1 is not none, but mismatched index 2 is none. That means we only found one mismatched character. At that point, there's nothing we can swap that with. So this will have to return false. Finally, if we get down to this point, we've already checked if we don't have any mismatches. We've checked if we only have one mismatched. Now, one thing I'll point out, we always set this mismatched index 1 first. So this one will always be the one that we'd have to check that it's not none. Now at this point, we could have two mismatched characters. Actually, at this point, we would have two mismatched characters. We've made it past these checks. We've already checked that we don't have any mismatched characters, and we've returned. We've checked that we only have one mismatched character, and we've returned. And here, we've checked if we have more than two mismatched characters, and we return. So if we reach this point, we know that we have two mismatched characters. We could do a check, we could do another if, but we don't really need to, because logically we can only get to this point in our code if we have two mismatched characters. All right, so what do we return? Well, okay, so at this point we know we have two mismatched characters at index I and j, or in our case, mismatched index 1, mismatched index 2. And what they tell us here is we should be able to swap s at I and s at j for each other to get goal. So what we could do is we could create a new string, swap these characters, and compare it to goal. Or, what I prefer, is we can check to see if the character at mismatch index 1 in our string s matches the character at mismatch index 2 in our goal. Meaning if we swapped this character in s, it would line up with this character, index 2, in our goal. And we also have to check to see if the opposite's true, that the mismatched index 2 in our s matches mismatched index 1 in our goal. So this is a little bit of a long return, so I might break this up into 2 lines. So first, we'll check s mismatched index 1 has to equal goal at mismatched index 2, and I'll break this up into 2 lines, and to do that I put a forward slash. Or is that a backslash? I always get these mixed up. All right, so to break this up into another line, I put this slash at the end of this line. That lets me create a new line here. And then we also have to check to see if s mismatched index 2 is equal to goal at mismatched index 1. So this gives us our final case. We check to see if we swap this character, index 1, with index 2, we end up with this character, index 2, index 1. Yeah, this is complicated. This is a tough, easy problem. Okay, let's see if we can pass. All right, this works. Let's see if we can pass all the tests. And we pass. And we do really well, surprisingly well. We beat 94% for runtime and 92% for memory. Whoa. That is shocking. This is a lot of code. I was surprised that this would do so well. So yeah, we pass and we beat 94% for runtime and 92% for memory. So that's not too bad. All right, this one does have a lot of these extra variables in here just so things were clear. I tried to make this as clear and easy to follow as possible. Some of this stuff could be cleaned up. You don't need to have all these extra variables in here. So we might actually be able to do even better. But I'll leave that one up to you. All right, check this one out. Again, this is LeetCode 859 buddy strings. Well, that is it for me. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned something. Hope you can go out and write better code.